Hey, this is Pastor Bunjee Garrett, and I want to take this opportunity to present you with another word of encouragement. Now, just in case you haven't heard already, well, you might like to know that FBI Director Christopher Wray, he just issued a warning regarding the imminent terror attacks that are about to take place here on American soil. Here's how he put it, and I quote, "In this heightened environment, there's no question we're seeing an increase in reported threats, and we've got to be on the lookout, especially for lone actors who may take inspiration from recent events to commit violence of their own." That's right, the recent events that he's referring to. Well, this is, of course, a reference to the horrific attack on Israel's southern border. And according to Director Wray, they're closely monitoring events that are currently unfolding here in America. And he's promised that he's going to share all relevant information with state, local, federal, international, and not to mention intelligence and homeland security agencies, and all of this in order to ensure that they're prepared for any impacts on our public safety. Oh, good. They're on top of it. Now, as we consider this new concern of the FBI, let's not forget that, the border policies of the Biden administration have effectively allowed untold numbers of terrorists to enter our country over the past several years. As a matter of fact, more than 7 million illegal aliens have been encountered on America's borders since Biden was installed there in Washington. And while at least 4 million illegal immigrants have been allowed to enter our country under parole status, there's also been an unknown number of illegal aliens who successfully entered the interior of the U.S. after evading our border patrol. And listen, within the first 2 weeks of this month alone, border agents have apprehended scores of military-aged males, which include nearly 60 Syrians, 34 Pakistanis, and more than 100 Russians. They've also apprehended 285 Afghans, nearly 2,000 Chinese migrants, and 30 Iranians, 4 of whom were captured here in Texas and are considered to be special interest aliens. You might also be interested to know here that over the last 12 months, our Border Patrol has stopped at least 160 illegal immigrants who were on the FBI's terror watch list. And knowing that there are untold numbers of gotaways, well, I can't help but to wonder how many of those gotaways are terrorists who have evil intentions. It's impossible for us to say for sure, and yet when I consider the way that FBI Director Wray is now shifting his focus, I must assume that things are about to ramp up here in the United States of America. I'll remind you, it was back in 2021, that's when Director Wray assured us that, it's the white supremacists who are our biggest terrorist threats here in the U.S. But now he's shifting his attention from the white supremes to these foreign terrorists, and Wray is now encouraging every American to be aware of the foreign terrorists that they've allowed into our country. And he did this by declaring this, and I quote, "I encourage you to stay vigilant, because as the first line of defense in protecting our communities, you are often the first to see the signs that someone may be mobilizing to violence. And I'd also ask you to continue sharing any intelligence or observations you may have. And on our end, we're committed to doing the same so that together we can safeguard our communities." Now, it's my understanding that the Homeland Security is our first line of defense. That's right. The Department of Homeland Security is responsible for securing the U.S. border, as well as our ports of entry, like airports. And so they're the ones that are supposed to be stopping the terrorists from getting into America. Without debate, the TSA does a great job hassling Americans who aren't on a terror list just because we're trying to fly to this place or the other. But then, the Department of Homeland Security has completely failed to fund the same level of security that we have in our airports. They failed to fund the same level of security at our borders. And now that they've allowed an unknown number of terrorists to invade our nation, FBI Director Wray is calling upon all U.S. citizens to act as the first line of defense in protecting our communities because they've failed to do this. So, does this mean that the Biden administration is finally ready to acknowledge that every American has been called to become a well-regulated militia who are armed and ready to respond? No, no, they're not going to acknowledge that. They still want to take away your right to keep and bear arms. They just want you to be vigilant to report suspicious activities, to the law enforcement agents who have been so defunded at this point in time that they won't be able to respond in any sort of timely fashion. So let's see if I understand all this correctly. The Biden administration has failed to secure our borders, and as a result, they've allowed an unknown number of terrorists to enter the country. And now, rather than acting upon the intel that they've been gathering, they're going to call upon all Americans to be vigilant citizens who are going to take it upon themselves to act as the first line of defense in protecting our communities. Great job, geniuses. Now, in light of these orders, I encourage you, let's do what he's saying. Let's report. Let's report every group that stands with Hamas. For example, it was just last night when a New York City nightclub called The End, they hosted a pro-Hamas Intifada Fund raver. And just to be clear, Intifada is an Arabic word that literally means shaking off. And in a Palestinian context, this is used in reference to the ethnic cleansing of the Jews. And so with that, let's report the club owners there at The End for their support of the terrorist attacks on Israel. Oh, how about the New York City public school teacher named Jahed Ahmad, who just recently expressed his public support for Hamas terrorists. And he did this by posting an image on Facebook of the Hamas paragliders who came in and attacked the ravers there in southern Israel just last week. Not only that, but he also included the statement on this image, "I stand with Palestine." In other words, this high school teacher who works at Gotham Tech, he fully supports the Hamas terrorists who killed and kidnapped and tortured innocent civilians there in southern Israel. And with that, vigilant Americans ought to report this teacher to the authorities. Not only that, but the same image was used by the members of a Black Lives Matter chapter there in Chicago. As a matter of fact, it was just last week. That's when BLM Chicago posted an image in support of Hamas terrorists who used paragliders to attack innocent civilians there in southern Israel. And seeing how the BLM Chicago chapter was founded by a gal named Aislinn Pulley, well, vigilant Americans ought to report Pulley to the authorities according to the instructions of Director Wray. Oh, and how about those on the progressive left who are now calling on the United States to take in 1 million Palestinian refugees from Gaza? And this, despite the fact that a 2021 poll has already revealed that 68% of Palestinians actually support continued attacks on Israel. Now think about that for a moment. If we bring 1 million Palestinian refugees from Gaza to America, and 68% of those refugees still support terrorist attacks on Israel, well, then you better believe that this will only result in more anti-Israeli activism here in the United States of America. And with that being the case, we have to probably report every progressive leftist who is now working hard to bring 680,000 anti-Israeli Arabs into the United States of America. Let's report those people. And as we consider everything that's happening here in our country, I agree with Director Wray because I do think that this is the time for us to be vigilant, knowing that we are living in a time when bloodthirsty terrorists are celebrating, these attacks on Israel, and they're also, being celebrated as heroes. Yeah, bloodthirsty terrorists are being celebrated as heroes. Clearly, this is a day when good is being called evil and evil is being called good. And with that, I can't help but to remember the warning that Jesus presented when he compared these days, the days just before his return, he compared these days to the days of Noah. And in order to grasp this comparison, let's consider the way that Moses described those days of Noah. It's in Genesis chapter 6, verses 11 and 12, where Moses declares, "The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. So God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth." Now from this we can see that the Lord ended up punishing the people during the days of Noah, and the reason why is because they were so corrupted before God that the earth was just filled with violence. And listen, that word violence is translated from the Hebrew word Hamas. That's right, the word violence is translated from the Hebrew word Hamas. And Hamas in Hebrew means violence, it means cruelty, it means injustice. At the same time, it's also interesting to note that the Arabic word Hamas means zealous or zeal. And while it's true that the Hebrew and Arabic languages are sister languages, it's also true that the Arabic zeal of Hamas is nothing more than violence, cruelty, and injustice in the eyes of God. With that being the case, we'd all do well to report those who are standing with Hamas because they're standing with violence. And at the same time, we should also remember that the Lord Jesus came to save both Jew and Arab alike. And it's for this reason that I encourage every Christian, let's look for every opportunity to continue proclaiming the gospel message of Jesus Christ to every unbeliever who will listen, regardless of how they define Hamas. And as we lead the people to the Lord Jesus Christ, He will help us to fight the good fight of faith, and all for the glory of God.